April 4, 1943. Off the coast of Bougainville, a dozen Japanese ships, from agile destroyers to heavy merchantmen, are sitting in what they believe is perfect safety. Their anti-aircraft gunners are relaxed. Their fighter pilots, the proud and seemingly invincible aces of the Imperial Japanese Navy, are amused. They look up and see it. A twin-engine American bomber, the B-25 Mitchell. It's flying low. Too low. Insanely low. It's skimming the waves, a tactic they've seen before. A tactic they've been trained to mock. They call it a flying coffin. A slow, clumsy duck. They think they know exactly what it's going to do. They are about to learn they know nothing. This isn't a story about a better bomb or a faster plane. This is a story about an idea. A heretical, dangerous, brilliant idea born from desperation and ingenuity. The idea that you could take a weapon everyone had underestimated, give it to men everyone had written off, and use it in a way no one had ever dreamed of to change the course of a war. And it all started with a failure. Welcome to the story of the B-25 Mitchell and the day it rewrote the rules of war. I'm your guide, and we're going to dive deep into one of the most stunning, yet often overlooked, tactical revolutions of the Pacific theater. If you love stories where the underdog, against all odds, not only wins but completely redefines the game, you're in the right place. Picture this, it's early 1943. The war in the Pacific is a brutal, bloody pendulum. After the shock of Pearl Harbor, we've had the daring Doolittle raid, a morale boost that screamed, we're still in this fight. And the strategic miracle of Midway, which broke the back of the Japanese carrier fleet. But on the ground, and in the skies over the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, it's a grueling, inch-by-inch slog. The Japanese Empire is still a formidable, disciplined, and fanatically confident force. Their pilots, veterans of the war in China, are among the best in the world. Their Mitsubishi A6M0 is a legend, a nimble, long-range predator that can turn inside any American fighter. They believe, with a religious fervor, in their own invincibility and the superiority of their technology and their spirit, what they call Yamato Damashii. And then there's the American equipment. In these early days, we're often outclassed. Our P-39 Airacobra? A decent ground attack plane, but a death trap in a dogfight against a Zero. Our P-40 Warhawk? Tough as nails, but heavy and sluggish at high altitudes. And our medium bombers? Well, that's where our story truly begins. The B-25 Mitchell was a good plane. Solid. Reliable. It had proven itself in Jimmy Doolittle's audacious raid on Tokyo, launched from the deck of an aircraft carrier, a feat everyone thought was impossible. But in the daily, grinding attrition of the South Pacific campaign, the Mitchell was being chewed up. The doctrine of the time was clear: bombers fly high. They fly in tight formations, like flying fortresses, so their defensive guns can protect each other. They level off at 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 feet and drop their bombs in a pattern, hoping to hit a ship from directly above. It wasn't working. The Japanese knew this playbook. They'd read it, they'd studied it, and they had an answer for it. Their ships were equipped with powerful anti-aircraft guns designed to fill the sky with flak at those precise altitudes. And their Zero pilots had developed a devastatingly effective tactic, the head-on pass. They'd fly directly into the bomber formation, their cannons blazing, exploiting the one angle where the B-25's defensive guns were weakest. The results were predictable and they were horrific. B-25s were falling out of the sky. Crews, many of them boys from the farms of Iowa and the streets of Brooklyn who'd never seen an ocean before they shipped out, were dying in the burning, oil-slicked waters. Morale was complicated. There was still that fierce American determination, but it was being tempered by a cold, hard fear. A sense that maybe, just maybe, the other guy had a better playbook. The Japanese pilots began to mock the B-25. They saw it as a slow, predictable flying target. A coffin. And from their perspective, why wouldn't they? They were winning the exchange. But what they dismissed as a weakness, the B-25's sturdy, rugged airframe, was about to become its greatest strength. And what they interpreted as a lack of creativity in American tactics was about to be proven the most catastrophic miscalculation of their lives. Because in the sweltering, disease-ridden jungles of New Guinea, a handful of maverick American pilots were about to tear up the playbook and write a new one. In blood. And in fire. So, how did a plane written off as a flying coffin become the most fearsome ship killer in the South Pacific? The answer lies not in a factory, but in the mind of a desperate man, staring at a bomb, and thinking, what if we throw it like a stone? To understand the revolution, you first have to understand the stalemate. Let's set the stage. It's the beginning of 1943. The setting, the Bismarck Sea. Look here. The Japanese are trying to reinforce their major base at Lae, on the north coast of New Guinea. It's a crucial stronghold. From here, they threaten Port Moresby, and ultimately, Australia itself. To get men and supplies to Lae, they have to run a gauntlet of American and Australian air power, a stretch of water known as the Bismarck Sea. In early March, a massive Japanese convoy sets sail, 8 transports, carrying nearly 7,000 soldiers, escorted by 8 destroyers. This is a serious, powerful force. The Allied air forces throw everything they have at it. High-level B-17 flying fortresses. B-25s using standard medium-altitude tactics. 20 Havocs. And it works, sort of. Over several days of brutal, relentless attacks, the Allies sink all 8 transports and 4 of the destroyers. It's a major victory, a strategic triumph that cripples Japan's ability to fight in New Guinea. But, and this is a crucial but, the cost is terrifying. The Japanese anti-aircraft fire is a wall of steel. And the Zeros are everywhere. They slice through the bomber formations with those deadly head-on attacks. American planes are getting shot to pieces. The survivors land at their bases, their aircraft riddled with holes, their crews shaken, counting empty bunks in the mess hall. One of those survivors is a man named Major Paul I. Pappy Gunn. Now, Pappy Gunn is a legend in the making. He's not a West Point graduate. He's a former U.S. Navy enlisted pilot, a barnstormer, a fixer, a tinkerer. A man with grease under his fingernails and a welding torch in his hand. He's the kind of officer who drives the regular army brass crazy because he doesn't always follow the rules. But in a war being fought at the very edge of the supply chain, 10,000 miles from home, Pappy Gunn is a god. He's the head of maintenance for the 5th Air Force's 3rd Attack Group. And he's seen the aftermath. He's seen the young men, boys he knows by name, carried out of shattered B-25s. He's seen the bullet holes and he knows where they're coming from, straight ahead. So, Pappy does what he does best. He starts to tinker. In a sweltering, makeshift hangar at Charters Towers in Australia, surrounded by mosquitoes and the ever-present smell of oil and jungle rot, Pappy Gunn and his team perform what can only be described as field surgery on a B-25. They strip out the co-pilot seat. They tear out the cumbersome, barely effective ventral gun turret. And in the nose of the aircraft, that sleek, perspex-covered bombardier station, they do something radical. They weld in 4 fixed, forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. Think about that for a second. This is heresy. You're turning a bomber into a gun platform. You're removing its ability to have a co-pilot, to carry a bombardier. The high-altitude bombing doctrine is built around the Norden bomb site, a top-secret, gyroscopically stabilized marvel of engineering that is supposed to drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. And Pappy Gunn is just throwing it out the window. But his logic is brutally simple. If the Japs are going to fly straight at us, we're going to fly straight at them. We're going to meet their head-on pass with a head-on pass of our own, with 8.50 calories screaming back at them. It's a duelist mentality. It's a street brawl. The first time a Zero pilot, accustomed to seeing a bomber timidly hold its course, saw a B-25 lower its nose and transform into a blazing, fire-breathing dragon, you can imagine the shock. The sheer, disorienting, what in God's name, confusion. It was a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. But Pappy wasn't done. He was just getting started. The forward-facing guns were the answer to the Zero problem. But the ship problem remained. How do you reliably sink a moving, maneuvering warship from the air? High-level bombing was insanely difficult against a ship. It was like trying to drop a rock from the top of a skyscraper onto a speeding car. The standard solution was the torpedo, but American torpedoes in early 1943 were, well, they were a national disgrace. They were notoriously unreliable. They'd run too deep, passing harmlessly under the target's keel. Their magnetic detonators would fail. They'd circle back and sink the ship that launched them. They were expensive, complicated, and they didn't work. So what was left? You had to get low. You had to get so low that you couldn't possibly miss. This was called masthead bombing or skip bombing. The idea was to come in just above the waves, so low that you're below the effective range of the ship's heavy anti-aircraft guns. You'd fly directly at your target and at the last possible second, release a bomb with a delayed action fuse. The bomb would hit the water and skip. Just like a flat stone you'd skip across a pond as a kid. It would skip across the surface of the ocean once, twice, and slam directly into the side of the ship, right at the waterline. The effect was catastrophic. A bomb exploding inside a ship is infinitely more destructive than one exploding on the deck above it. It was a guaranteed kill. The theory was sound. The Royal Air Force had used a similar technique against German dams. But in the Pacific, it was considered suicidal. You're flying a medium bomber, a plane with a wingspan of over 67 feet, just 200, 100, even 50 feet above the water. You're flying directly into the teeth of the enemy's light anti-aircraft guns, the 25mm cannons and the machine guns that are designed to hit low-flying aircraft. There's no margin for error. A single lucky shot, a moment of turbulence, a misjudgment of altitude, and you and your crew are a fireball smeared across the surface of the Pacific. The Japanese knew about this tactic. They'd heard the rumors, and they laughed. To them, it confirmed their belief that the Americans were desperate, reckless, and foolish. They were convinced no pilot could be skilled enough, or crazy enough, to make it work consistently. They saw it as a tactic of last resort, not a weapon of war. They were about to be proven dead wrong. Because one man, USAF General George Kenney, the pugnacious, brilliant commander of the 5th Air Force, believed in Pappy Gunn's mad science. And he believed in the men of the 3rd Attack Group and the 38th Bomb Group. He gave them his blessing. He told them, go out there and try it. Sink me some ships. And so, they began to train. In the safe waters off the Australian coast, they found an old, derelict hulk. And they started practicing. Day after day, night after night. They'd take their heavily modified B-25s, their commerce destroyers, and they'd scream in over the waves. They'd learn the feel of the plane at 0 feet. They'd learn to judge the release point, not with a bomb sight, but with a mark on their windshield and a gut feeling. It was terrifying, exhausting work. They'd come back from training missions drenched in sweat, their hands shaking not from enemy fire, but from the sheer, white-knuckle concentration of flying a multi-ton bomber at 250 miles per hour a stone's throw from the water. They made mistakes. They dropped bombs too late, sending them skipping over the target. They dropped them too early, watching them sink harmlessly. They scared themselves and each other half to death. But slowly, surely they got better. The chaos began to crystallize into a procedure. A deadly, precise dance. They developed their own formations, their own signals. They became a team. A brotherhood of men who knew they were doing something no one else could do. The Japanese pilots, watching from a distance, seeing these odd, low-level training flights, simply shook their heads and chuckled. The Americans are practicing their suicide, they'd say. They had no idea that these men were not practicing suicide. They were practicing murder. And their first real test, their final exam, was coming. A convoy was gathering at Rabaul, the impregnable Japanese fortress. A convoy of a dozen ships, fat with troops and tanks and supplies, destined for the front lines. It was a target ripe for the picking. The stage was set. The players were ready. The old playbook was burned. A new one was written, in the language of skipped bombs and forward-firing guns. The question was, when the moment came, when the flak started to fill the air and the Zeros dove, would it work? Or was General Kenney about to send his best men on a one-way trip to a watery grave? That's the cliff our pilots were standing on. And in our next part, we'll dive into the cockpit with them, feel the vibration of the engines, taste the fear, and experience the chaos and the glory of the mission that would change everything. But for now, consider this. What must it have been like to be one of those young pilots, knowing you were about to try a tactic that your enemy considered a joke? To carry the weight of that innovation, that hope on your shoulders? To know that failure wasn't just a defeat, but a validation of every mocking laugh from the other side? The fate of the Pacific was riding on a skipped stone, and the clock was ticking down to zero. In a sweltering, mosquito-infested quonset hut in Port Moresby, a revolution was being calculated. Not with speeches or proclamations, but with math, with physics, with the cold, hard logic of ballistics and angles. The problem was simple. How do you make a bomb behave like a bullet? How do you take a 500-pound iron brute, a thing designed to fall, and teach it to fly? This was the obsession. This was the puzzle that consumed the men of the 5th Air Force. And while the Japanese high command slept soundly, confident in their superiority, confident that the Americans were too clumsy, too unimaginative to ever threaten their lifelines, these men, in the sticky heat of the night, were inventing a new kind of hell just for them. Last time we saw the stalemate. We saw the B-25 Mitchell being chewed up by Zeros and flak, dismissed as a flying coffin. We met the mavericks like Pappy Gunn, who turned the bomber into a strafing beast with 8 forward-firing .50 calories. And we introduced the heretical idea of skip bombing, a tactic the Japanese laughed at. But an idea is just a theory until men are willing to bet their lives on it. This is the story of how that bet was placed. This is the forging of the commerce destroyers. General George Kenney wasn't just a commander, he was a gambler. He saw the raw, unproven potential in Pappy Gunn's modified B-25s and the skip bombing theory. But he was too smart to send his men on a suicide run without a fighting chance. He needed to turn a wild idea into a repeatable, deadly science. He needed a laboratory. And his laboratory was the 90th Bombardment Squadron, the Jolly Rogers. He gave them a simple, terrifying order. Let's climb into the cockpit with one of these pioneers. Let's call him Lieutenant Jack Flash Reynolds. He's 22 years old, from Kansas. A farm boy who used to shoot crows with a .22 rifle from his porch. Now, he's sitting at the controls of a 20-ton bomber, skimming so low over the coral sea that the salt spray smears his windshield. His co-pilot's seat is empty. In its place, more ammunition boxes for the forward guns. His bombardier is gone, replaced by a gunner lying prone in the nose, his eye fixed on a simple gun sight. The Norden bomb sight, that sacred cow of the Army Air Forces, is locked away. They won't need it where they're going. Flash, VO, young, tense, trying to sound cooler than he feels. Okay boys, settle down. Coming up on the run. Remember, low and slow gets you dead. We go in fast and lower than a snake's belly. The target is an old, rusted-out Australian freighter, the SS Micambo, condemned to be a practice target. It sits, lonely and gray, in a designated bay. To Flash and his crew, it's not a derelict. It's the Yamato. It's a Japanese destroyer, its decks lined with 25mm anti-aircraft guns, all pointed right at them. The technique is everything. They approach at wavetop height, maybe 200 feet. As they get closer, they drop even lower, to 100, then 50 feet. The ocean is a blur of green and white beneath them. They can see individual fish. The sensation of speed is unbelievable. At 240 miles per hour, 50 feet is the difference between flying and dying. A wingtip dipping a few feet too low would catch a wave and cartwheel the plane into a fireball. They don't dive. That's the old way. They fly straight and level, like a bullet. The ship grows in the windshield, from a speck to a model to a colossal steel wall. Flash, though, strained through gritted teeth. Steady, steady. Gunner, you see anything that even looks like a gun port, you hose it down. Inside, the noise is a physical thing. The deafening roar of the engines, the scream of the wind, the frantic chatter of the interphone. The crew is a symphony of controlled terror. The engineer is monitoring the engines, watching for the slightest power drop. The radio man is manning the waist guns, scanning the empty sky for imaginary zeros. And in the nose, The gunner has his thumb on the trigger of the 4 forward .50 calories. Gunner, ho. A Brooklyn accent, sharp and fast. I see you, you son of a... Firing. The freighter fills the entire world now. They're so close they can see the rust streaks on its hull. Flash, VO. A sharp, loud command, bomb away. This is the moment of truth. The bomb, fitted with a delayed action fuse, tumbles out. It hits the water, and for a heart-stopping second, it disappears. Then it reappears, skipping. Twice. It's not falling, it's skimming, a flat, black stone of death, hurled at over 200 miles per hour. Flash yanks back on the yoke, banking the heavy plane violently to the right, climbing just enough to clear the ship's mast by what feels like inches. Everyone holds their breath. They look back. The bomb misses. It skips clean over the freighter's deck and explodes harmlessly in the water on the other side. A string of curses erupts over the interphone. The disappointment is a tangible, heavy weight in the cockpit. Flash, VO. Frustrated, exhausted. Damn it. Too late. I released a half second too late. Okay, circle around. We're doing it again. And they do. Again and again and again. Day after day. They practice in clear weather. They practice in rain squalls that turn the world into a gray soup. They practice at dusk, when the light is tricky and shadows lie. They learn that the sweet spot for release is about 300 yards out. They learn that a shallow, 5-degree skip angle is perfect. They learn that if you see the bomb skip more than twice, you've released too early. They are, quite literally, writing the manual with their own near-death experiences. The failure rate is staggering. At first, maybe 1 in 10 bombs finds its mark. Then 2. Then 5. The pressure is immense. They know the entire strategy of the South Pacific campaign is starting to hinge on their ability to pull this off. General Kenny is betting his reputation and thousands of lives on their success. And through it all, the dark humor that keeps soldiers sane begins to emerge. They start calling their modified B-25s strafer models. They paint sharks' teeth on the noses, a grim joke about getting in close enough to bite. They develop a fierce, almost arrogant pride. They are no longer just bomber crews. They are a new breed of warrior. They are naval artillerymen who fly. Meanwhile, the intelligence reports from coast watchers and codebreakers are painting a target. A large Japanese convoy is being assembled. It's not a matter of if they will be called upon, but when. The training intensifies. The stakes are raised. They begin practicing with live bombs, not just dummies. The concussive blasts from their near misses shake their own aircraft. The derelict Macambo is finally, utterly, pulverized into a sinking wreck. They are ready, or as ready as they'll ever be. The Japanese, of course, are watching. Their scouts and submarines report increased low-level bombing practice by the Americans. The reports are filed away. The conclusion reached by Japanese Naval Command is a masterpiece of arrogant miscalculation. They see it as confirmation of Allied desperation. They are resorting to futile, low-level attacks because their high-altitude bombing has failed, one staff officer writes. Their losses will be catastrophic. It was the exact same thinking that led the cavalry to mock the tank. The exact same thinking that led the battleship admiral to dismiss the aircraft carrier. It was the arrogance of the established order, looking down its nose at the disruptive newcomer. The stage wasn't just set for a battle. It was set for a demonstration. A brutal, public demonstration that would humiliate an empire. But before the main event, there would be a preview. A chance to test their new weapon in the heat of combat, against a target that truly mattered. The intelligence was solid. A Japanese heavy cruiser, the Haguro, was reported to be making a high-speed run to evacuate troops from a besieged island. It was a perfect, fleeting target. Flash Reynolds and his crew got the alert. This was it. Not a convoy, not a freighter. A warship. A real, honest-to-God warship, with trained crews and a forest of anti-aircraft guns. As they pre-flighted their plane, a B-25 they'd christened Kansas City Kitten, the mood was different. The joking had stopped. The ground crew worked with a quiet, solemn intensity. Each man knew the odds. Attacking a cruiser like this was the ultimate test. It was faster, more maneuverable, and far more heavily armed than anything they'd practiced on. Flash looked at his crew. Kids, all of them. The gunner from Brooklyn, the navigator from Oregon, the radio man from Texas. He saw the fear in their eyes, and he knew it mirrored his own. But he also saw the determination, the unspoken agreement that they were the ones who had to prove this could work. They climbed into the cockpit, the familiar routine now charged with a deadly seriousness. The engines coughed to life. They taxied to the runway, a long, muddy strip carved out of the jungle. As they roared down the strip and lifted into the humid air, Flash Reynolds had one thought, a thought that would have made the Japanese admirals scoff in disbelief. He wasn't flying a bomber anymore. He was flying a 20-ton, twin-engine, .50 caliber sniper rifle. And he was about to take his first shot at a king. What happened next? Did the Kansas City Kitten and her crew prove the worth of their crazy tactic? Or did they become just another statistic, another burning wreck to be mocked by the enemy? The answer would come over the open water, in a storm of steel and fire. And we'll tell that story next. That sound. The sound of a door locking. For the Japanese Imperial Navy in early March of 1943, it was the sound they didn't hear. The sound of their strategic options closing. Because while they were still planning convoys, still moving troops and supplies as if they owned these waters, a key had been turned. A new weapon had been forged in the jungles of New Guinea. And now it was about to be unleashed. Last time, we left the crews of the 3rd Attack Group as they finished their brutal training. They had turned their B-25s into something new, something the Japanese had no classification for. They were no longer medium bombers. They were commerce destroyers. And their first real test was coming. Not against a lone ship, but against an entire convoy. A convoy that represented the lifeblood of Japan's campaign in New Guinea. This is the story of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. The day the Mockery died. The target was Convoy 81, a formation of 8 transports carrying nearly 7,000 troops of the 51st Division, escorted by 8 destroyers. It was a floating fortress, commanded by Admiral Masatomi Kimura, a man confident in his destroyer screens and the fighter cover from Rabaul. The Allies knew they were coming. Ultra codebreakers had delivered the Japanese plans on a silver platter. General Kenny prepared a layered attack, a masterstroke of aerial tactics. The first waves on March 2nd were B-17s and B-24s, not to sink ships, but to scatter the formation, to force the ships to maneuver, to break their defensive integrity. It worked. The convoy began to lose its cohesion. But March 3, 1943, was the main event. The day the strafers would earn their name. Let's fly with Lieutenant Flash Reynolds and the Kansas City Kitten. Their squadron was part of the final, decisive wave. Flash, VO, all right, settle down. There they are. Remember the drill. It's just a bigger, angrier Macambo. The scene that greeted them was apocalyptic. The sea was littered with lifeboats and burning oil. The air thick with smoke and the crump of anti-aircraft fire. The convoy was already damaged, but it was still fighting, still dangerous. They dropped down to the deck. 50 feet. The altimeter was meaningless now. They were flying by instinct, by the spray kicking up from their propellers. Tracer fire reached for them, lazy-looking arcs that suddenly became deadly rivers of lead. Gunner, VO, screaming over the roar, targeting the lead destroyer. Firing. The Kitten's nose blazed. Their job was to suppress, to kill the gunners, to shatter the bridge windows. To terrify. They picked their target, a transport, desperately trying to turn. It was too late. Flash, VO, a sharp, guttural yell, bomb away. The 500-pound bomb skipped twice, a perfect, flat trajectory, and slammed into the transport's side, just at the waterline. Navigator, VO, shouting, direct hit. She's done. The transport shuddered, a gout of flame and smoke erupting from its innards. It began to list immediately, its back broken. But the fight wasn't over. A Zero, flown by a pilot who had likely mocked the B-25 for months, dove on them. Waist gunner to 0. 6 o'clock. He's coming in hot. The Kitten was ready. The top turret and waist guns opened up, creating a wall of fire the Zero pilot had never seen from a bomber. He hesitated, pulled up, and presented his belly to the gunners. It was a fatal mistake. .50 caliber rounds walked across his fuselage and into his fuel tanks. The Zero vanished in a fireball. All across the battle area, the same scene played out. B-25s, modified with PAPI guns, forward-firing guns, were strafing ships with terrifying ferocity, then skip-bombing them into oblivion. The Japanese were utterly unprepared for this kind of attack. Their anti-aircraft guns were designed for higher altitudes. Their tactics were useless against aircraft flying below their decks. The battle was a rout. By the end of March 4th, the entire convoy was at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. All 8 transports and 4 of the 8 destroyers were sunk. Nearly 3,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors were killed. The 51st Division was effectively destroyed before it ever reached the front. American losses were minimal. A handful of aircraft. The B-25, once mocked as a flying coffin, had proven to be one of the most devastating ship killers of the war. The Japanese high command was stunned into silence. Their after-action reports were filled with disbelief. They had no counter. The doctrine of the strafer had arrived. In the wake of the Bismarck Sea battle, the mood at the Allied airfields was euphoric, but tempered with exhaustion and grief for the lost crews. They had done it. They had proven the heretics right. 4 Flash Reynolds and his crew landing the Kansas City Kitten was a surreal experience. Their plane was riddled with bullet holes, but they were alive. The ground crew swarmed them, slapping them on the back. But the celebration was quiet. They knew how close it had been. The strategic impact was immediate and profound. The Japanese could no longer safely reinforce their positions in New Guinea by sea. Their campaign was crippled. The balance of power in the South Pacific had irrevocably shifted. But this was not the end. It was the beginning. The success of the Bismarck Sea battle meant one thing. The strafers were now the tip of the spear. And their next target would be even bigger, even more heavily defended. The Japanese fortress of Rabaul itself. The mockery had ended. The fear had begun. And in Part 4, we'll see how the B-25 Mitchell, the plane they called a coffin, became the hunter in the enemy's own backyard. That sound, the sound of their own martial pride, broken. Replaced by a new sound, a sound they heard in their nightmares after the Bismarck Sea. The sound of an engine they had laughed at. The sound of a plane they had called a coffin. Now, it was the sound of their empire crumbling, one sunk ship at a time. Last time, we witnessed the triumph. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea, where the skip-bombing B-25s annihilated an entire Japanese convoy, proving their revolutionary tactics and silencing their mockers for good. But in war, victory doesn't mean you get to rest. It means the enemy is now afraid of you. And a cornered, fearful enemy is a dangerous one. The fortress of Rabaul was that cornered enemy. A hive of warships, airfields, and flak guns. And now, the hunters were going right into the hive. Rabaul. The name alone sent a chill down the spines of Allied airmen. It was the Pearl Harbor of the Japanese Empire in the South Pacific. A natural harbor ringed by active volcanoes, packed with 5 major airfields, swarming with hundreds of the best Zero pilots left, and protected by the most concentrated anti-aircraft defenses outside of the Japanese home islands. To attack Rabaul was considered a suicide mission. But after the Bismarck Sea, everything had changed. The B-25 strafers weren't just bombers anymore. They were instruments of strategic shock. And their commander, General Kenny, knew that to keep the Japanese off balance, he had to hit them where they felt safest. He had to make Rabaul itself unsafe. The target, the shipping, the lifeblood of the fortress. Dozens of merchant ships, tankers, and warships sat in Simpson Harbor, believing themselves protected by the ring of steel around them. The plan was audacious. It wasn't a high-altitude raid. It was a low-level strafing and skip-bombing run, right into the teeth of the lion. They would fly at wave height, under the radar, pop up over the volcanic ridge, and descend into the harbor itself, a maelstrom of flak and fighters. Let's go back to the cockpit with Flash Reynolds. The Kansas City Kitten had been patched up, her shark's teeth repainted, looking fiercer than ever. The briefing had been grim. The intelligence photos showed the harbor packed with targets. They also showed the gun emplacements. Every hilltop was a nest of anti-aircraft guns. Flash, VO. To his crew, the pre-mission tension palpable. All right, listen up. We all saw the pictures. This is it. The big one. They know we're coming now. They know what we can do. So they're going to throw everything they have at us. Everything. Remember your training. We go in fast, we hit hard, and we get the hell out. No heroics. Just good, precise flying and shooting. The flight to Rabaul was long and tense, skimming over the open ocean, watching for any sign of enemy patrols. Then, the volcanoes of New Britain appeared on the horizon, a dark, brooding silhouette. As they approached the coast, they dropped even lower, until the whitecaps seemed close enough to touch. Sound of engines at full throttle, the rush of wind at extreme low level. Navigator, VO. Coming up on the initial point, now. Pop up and now. Flash pulled back on the yoke, and the kitten climbed steeply over the jungle-covered ridge. And there it was. Spread out below them was Simpson Harbor. It was a sight that would have frozen the blood of any other pilot. A forest of ship masts and warship superstructures. And instantly, the entire horizon seemed to erupt in fire. Sound of a deafening, continuous cacophony, dozens of different caliber anti-aircraft guns firing at once, creating a wall of sound. The sky was filled with black puffs of heavy flak and the brilliant, deadly strings of light tracer fire from 25mm cannons. It was a curtain of steel. The Japanese were ready. Flash, pick a target. Any target. Gunner, suppress that destroyer on the left. The kitten was no longer just a plane, it was a blazing avatar of vengeance. All 8 forward guns were firing, hosing down the decks of a destroyer. Tracers from the ship and the plane crisscrossed in a lethal duel. They spotted a large, fat merchant ship trying to make a run for the open sea. It was perfect. Flash, that one. The tanker. Line it up. They dove down, leveling off at mast height. Tracer fire ripped past the cockpit, so close they could feel the heat. A shell exploded off their right wing, rocking the plane violently. Gunner, VO. Left wing taking hits. She's still flying. Flash, steady. Steady. Bomb away. The bomb skipped once, twice, and then slammed directly amidships into the tanker. The tanker didn't just sink, it disintegrated. A fireball rolled into the sky, visible for miles. Secondary explosions tore the ship apart. But the fight for the kitten wasn't over. Zeros, scrambled from the surrounding airfields, were now diving into the chaotic harbor. A Zero latched onto their tail. Waist gunner, Zero on our tail. He's firing. A cannon shell tore through the fuselage, wounding the radio operator. The plane shuddered, but the Strafer B-25s had one more surprise for the Zeros. They flew in mutually supporting pairs. As the Zero lined up its kill shot on the kitten, another B-25, Dragon's Breath, swept in from the side, its 8 forward guns cutting the Zero in half. It was a new form of aerial warfare. The bombers were protecting each other, fighting like fighters. The raid was a whirlwind of destruction that lasted mere minutes, but felt like a lifetime. When the B-25s emerged from the harbor, racing back out to sea at wave-top level, they left behind a scene of unparalleled devastation. Smoke from a dozen burning ships pillared into the sky. The harbor waters were choked with oil and debris. The Kansas City Kitten was a wreck. Hydraulic fluid leaked, one engine was shot up and running rough, and the fuselage looked like a colander. But she flew. She brought her crew home. The post-mission assessment was staggering. In that single, audacious raid, the B-25 strafers had sunk over 12 ships in a single day. Tankers, freighters, patrol boats. They had shattered the illusion of Rabaul's invincibility. In the aftermath, the impact was profound. The Japanese high command was thrown into disarray. They could not protect their most vital fortress. Their convoys were being annihilated at sea, and now their anchorages were no longer safe. The strategy of using skip-bombing B-25s had effectively severed Japan's maritime supply lines in the South Pacific. The mockery was a distant, bitter memory. Now, when a Japanese pilot saw a low-flying B-25, it wasn't contempt he felt. It was fear. For the men like Flash Reynolds, the war went on. But they had been part of something extraordinary. They had taken a weapon deemed obsolete by the enemy and, through courage, innovation, and sheer force of will, had turned it into a war-winning weapon. They weren't just pilots. They were pioneers who rewrote the book on aerial combat. The story of the B-25 Mitchell and the Skip Bombers is more than a tale of a single battle or a technical innovation. It's a timeless lesson in the dangers of underestimation. It's a testament to the power of the underdog who refuses to play by the established rules. It's a story of American grit, ingenuity, and the unbreakable bond between crews who trusted each other with their lives. The flying coffin had become the hunter. And in the end, it was the mockers who were buried at sea. They were just boys, most of them, from cities and farms across America. They weren't trying to be heroes. They were just trying to survive and to do their job. But in doing so, they changed the course of history. And that is a story that should never, ever be forgotten. Two sounds, two worlds. One, a ceremony of an empire grappling with a new, humiliating reality that their lifelines were being severed by a weapon they had arrogantly dismissed. The other, the sound of home, a world those young American boys were fighting to protect, a world most of them wouldn't see for years, if they were lucky. We followed this story from mockery to mastery, from the desperate experiments of Pappy Gunn to the fiery crucible of the Bismarck Sea and the audacious raid on Rabaul itself. The B-25 strafers had proven their point with brutal, undeniable finality. But what happened after the guns fell silent? What was the true, deeper cost of this triumph? And what is the legacy of these men and their skipped stones? This is the final chapter. The echo. Victory in battle is clean in the history books. A date, a tally of ships sunk, a strategic outcome. But for the men on the ground, victory is messy. It's written in fatigue, in loss, and in the quiet, private scars that never fully heal. Let's walk through the revetments at Dobodura Airfield in the days after the Great Rabaul Raid. The Kansas City Kitten is parked, a permanent resident now. The ground crew chief has looked her over and just shaken his head. The patched-up holes from previous missions were now a spiderweb of ruptured metal. The left engine was a lost cause. She wouldn't fly again. For Flash Reynolds and his crew, it's the end of an era. They're alive. They've survived their tour. But as they stand looking at the plane that carried them through hell, the emotion isn't joy. It's a profound, weary emptiness. They've lost friends. They've seen things no one should ever see. The gunner from Brooklyn has a piece of shrapnel lodged near his spine he'll carry for the rest of his life. The radio operator from Texas still jumps at loud noises. This was the human cost of their innovation. The skip bombing tactic wasn't a magic bullet. It was still brutally dangerous. For every successful raid, there were planes that didn't come back. Crews who vanished into the vastness of the Pacific, their fates unknown. The men who survived lived with a specific, grinding kind of stress. The knowledge that every mission required them to fly directly into the most intense defenses the enemy could muster. And what of the enemy? The Japanese high command could no longer ignore the truth. Their after-action reports, once filled with condescension, now spoke of the Devil bombers and their unprecedented and terrifying low-level attacks. The mockery was replaced by a frantic and ultimately futile effort to develop counter-tactics. They tried mounting more light guns on their ships. They tried new fighter interception patterns. But the psychological blow had been landed. The myth of Japanese invincibility, both in their own minds and in the eyes of their enemies, was shattered. The B-25 had done more than sink ships, it had sunk a dogma. The ripple effect of the strafers' success was immense. With Japanese maritime supply lines to New Guinea and the Solomons effectively severed, their island garrisons began to wither on the vine. Starved of reinforcements, ammunition, and fuel, these once formidable outposts became isolated, besieged prisons for their garrisons. This allowed Allied forces, under General MacArthur, to begin their legendary island-hopping campaign with far less resistance. The technique pioneered by the 3rd and 38th Bomb Groups became standard doctrine. The US Navy and Marine Corps adopted similar low-level attack profiles for their own aircraft. The success of the B-25 strafers proved a fundamental principle. In the face of a superior technology, a superior idea, executed with courage, could be the great equalizer. The B-25 Mitchell itself, the plane once mocked as obsolete, went on to serve with distinction in every theater of World War II, but its legacy as a ship killer was forged in the clear, deadly waters of the South Pacific. It was the right tool in the right hands at the right time. So, what are we to make of this story all these years later? It's more than just a thrilling tale of combat. It's a parable for all times. It's a warning against the arrogance of underestimation. The Japanese High Command looked at the B-25 and saw only what it wasn't. They didn't see what it could be. That failure of imagination cost them an empire. It's a testament to the power of the underdog who refuses to quit. The American crews didn't have the best plane at the start, but they had better ideas. They had Pappy Gunn's genius in a hangar, General Kenny's willingness to gamble, and the raw, gritty courage of young men like Flash Reynolds to fly into the fire and make those ideas work. And it's a lesson in resilience. It's about looking at the P-40s and B-25s in our own lives. The things, the skills, the people that others dismiss as outdated, inadequate, or foolish, and seeing the potential for greatness within them. It's about having the courage to skip your own bombs, to try a new angle, to fly low and fast when everyone else tells you to fly high and safe. The men of the 3rd Attack Group are mostly gone now. Their war, the one fought with .50 calibers and 500-pound bombs, is over. But the war of ideas, the struggle against complacency and hubris, is eternal. The next time you face a seemingly insurmountable challenge, remember the B-25 Mitchell. Remember that mockery is often the last resort of those who are afraid of your potential. Remember that with enough grit, enough ingenuity, and enough faith in your crew, you can turn a flying coffin into a weapon of destiny. You can make the mockers remember your name. They were called the Commerce Destroyers. And they did far more than destroy commerce. They helped destroy the darkness and light the way to peace. We would do well to remember them. End of documentary.